Hey y'all, it's your girl Lenita Harris here, and today we're continuing our balance series by talking about abstinence, sex, sensuality, and sexuality. Let's get into it.
It's never too late for you to embrace who you are. It's never too late to embrace who you were designed to be.
All right, so I'm sure that if you've been in or around any religious circles for any length of time, what you've predominantly heard about sex is don't do it. Just do not do it. Hard pass. And there's a few reasons why. The main one being, quote unquote, it's a sin outside of marriage. The big but, though, is that when you get married, have lots of it. Lots and lots and lots of it. Oh man, guys, I wish it were that easy to just flip a switch. So my story, real quick for those that may not know, my parents were teens when they had me, 15 and 17 to be exact, and my dad went into the Marines a few months after I was born. So as I was growing up, they were too in many regards, and though they weren't together, they did their best to teach me the lessons they had learned and were learning along the way. Now, my mother became very immersed in church when I was young. Child, that's just where we were. It seemed like we volunteered in everything, but I found it enjoyable, so it was cool. And as she was teaching me about life and sex and things of the like, abstinence would come up quite a bit because of a combination of our Christian beliefs and her actual story. So from a very early age, I decided that abstinence was my way, mainly because I believed it was God's way and also my mother's way. But around age 15, though, I realized that me not doing something just because it was someone else's way was likely not a strong enough reason to keep me in the long run. So I had to analyze my own reasons and weigh my own options so that what I believed could become mine, my own conviction, and not just a piggyback off someone else's convictions. Listen, that's a whole word right there. Guys, other people can't do our work for us. At best, they can only guide us and do their best to support us in our own decision making. I used to say all the time when I was younger, other people's prayers will only keep you for so long because there comes a point in your life when the rubber meets the road and you have to decide for yourself which way to go and what to depend on. Guys, it's hard to depend on something that we've never actually proved or something that's never actually become ours. People's lives don't just turn out the way that they turn out for some random reason. No, they are leaning and depending on something. And whatever they believe can be found in the fruit they produce. Our fruit will always showcase what's in our hearts. There's no way around that. That's why we must guard our hearts diligently. So I made the decision to abstain for myself. I wanted to wait until marriage because the evidence to me was overwhelming that that was just the best way to go. So I lived my life very conscious of that. I was incredibly strict on myself regarding guys and personal space and affection, okay? Because I didn't want to put myself in positions that were not conducive to me accomplishing that goal of waiting to marriage. And more often than not, I succeeded at that. And then I got married the year I was turning 30. So listen, I understand hormones and I understand discipline. The reality is that we all have some amount of sensuality within us. For some of us, it's awakened very early for various reasons. Now, y'all just read between those lines there. And for others, puberty is when it hits. And if we don't have someone guiding us through how to process that energy and harness it, child, we just be out here, just out here feeling the stuff and not knowing what to do with it. And also, it absolutely does not help to be immersed in a culture or a group that only ever mentions our sensual nature as something negative or something that needs to be shunned. Truly, most people just don't understand or know how to harness that sensual energy in such a way that doesn't bring about negative situations and circumstances in their lives. So they just say to cage it, avoid it, right? And then you have a whole bunch of people losing the battle of caging it. Guys, discipleship and mentorship is so vital because it truly helps to have someone in your life who has a healthy understanding of this sensual nature and a strong comfort level with it so they can guide you through the more difficult parts of your journey. And their comfort with their sensual nature helps you develop your own comfort level with it. And it makes it easier for you to build discipline for yourself. So I was older when a lady came into my life in this type of capacity, but I still welcomed the gift of her presence presence in my life. It was very, very refreshing. But what's interesting is the truth about our culture is that sex and sensuality is still a very taboo topic. The disadvantage that comes along with that taboo, though, is ignorance, naivety, a lack of comfort, which then leads to a lack of confidence in one's innate sensual desire, which could then extend into a lack of confidence in oneself. And also, this discomfort lends itself to false realities. And the fact that it's still largely a taboo subject is so ironic, given that our media is completely saturated with it, or allusions to it. Here's the thing. All of these elements, the ignorance, naivety, lack of comfort, all of those things that I just mentioned leads to imbalance in some way in people's lives, and maybe in many ways. I venture to say that the majority of people today didn't get introduced to sex through safe emotional channels or environments where they could learn and grow and understand and embrace their sensual nature without actually having or seeing sex. So many people are or have been introduced to sex under not so grand situations via other kids their age, pornography, or abuse in some way. For some, maybe all of those channels. And if you're out there listening to me and you identify with that, honey, you're not alone. I'm in that number too. So when looking at that truth, then the conversation must change and become less about don't do it and more about analysis and understanding, because there is an internal reconciliation of those things that needs to happen before true freedom can be embodied. Listen, you can yell don't all day to a person, but when there's no follow-up, explanation, or safe exploration on the other side of that don't, honey, that don't probably won't go that far. Y'all know, y'all was told the don'ts. How far did it go for you? So this podcast is going to be less about the don't and more about analysis, understanding, and options. So first off, let's discuss timing. Not yet is such a better response in many situations than just a no. Because if you think about it, even little kids want to know where babies come from, right? And that can be an awkward conversation for many reasons. But the reality is, you in your adult self can tell this kid where babies come from, but would they really understand it? Not if they don't know how to identify the actual parts that you'd mentioned. So regardless of what terminology you would use in this example or what explanation you'd give, you would basically give them something that their level of understanding can grasp, and then you alter that information as they grow in understanding. See my point? Basically, you're telling them you're not yet ready to hear this answer. Not yet is a phrase that lends itself to the future. No is just final. It's just, that's the end. So not yet is a better response in many situations. Now, for the great many of us who were introduced to sex before we could really grasp the understanding of it, it was too much information too fast, and we wound up stuck in cycles, traumatized, or possibly getting around a little early. And the main thing that was lost on us in that introduction was purpose and setting, which basically is timing, because we were introduced to physical intimacy with little to no control over that introduction, and so early that it was tough to reconcile and make sense of within. And if it stays unreconciled, then we'll eventually develop our own pattern of acting stuff out with others, because observational learning. I remember being in kindergarten. There was a young girl right beside me during nap time, 5 years old, guys, moving up and down on the mat. And I was like, what is happening? What is she doing? Listen, I found out what she was doing. That baby had gone through some things, and that's all I'm going to say. So when is the right time to enter into physical intimacy with someone? It does not matter what your sexual preference is, as has been the answer for this whole series. No one can determine that time but you. I will say that physical intimacy is not something to be taken lightly, nor entered into on a whim, because of all the responsibility that comes on the other side of that decision and the possible ramifications, because STDs and such are real, okay? You feel me? I mean, they scared the bejesus out of us in school showing us that doggone video. Trauma. Do y'all remember that video? Because I would like to not remember it, but honey, I sure do. So I'll give you my opinion of when it's absolutely unwise to enter. Number one, anytime before you are financially, psychologically, and emotionally prepared to take care of and be the sole provider for another life. Now that has no age frame or reference. Number 2, if you don't have some type of educational skill or trade skill that you are using to comfortably support yourself first financially, then it's just not wise to open that door yet. Number 3, if you're living in somebody else's house, my God, rent-free, or someone on a college campus, listen, because the burden of caring for a potential child will fall on those around you that you love and care for, and it's not fair to them for you to do that to them because they have their own lives to live and dreams to fulfill, many of which they likely already put on hold to raise you. All right? So before you open that door of physical intimacy with another, it's best to have a strong sense of personal responsibility. Listen, when in doubt, baby, just choose to not do it. Think beyond the imagined moment of pleasure. I'm placing strong emphasis on that word imagined because reality is often very different than our imagination. And it would be a shame to waste such a vulnerable, tender moment on a potentially dissatisfying or otherwise unfulfilling experience. And also, honey, once you do something once, it becomes easier to do again, especially if you kind of liked it. And that body count, oh, it will add up real fast, real fast. You don't believe me? Baby, ask the people who opened the door. You hear me? And Jasmine Sullivan got a whole album full of the saint stories. It's called Hotels. It's a beautifully written album, by the way. Lord have mercy, that baby can sing. But I digress. So when you do something once and then it becomes easier to do again because you kind of liked it, you will continue to do it until it eventually becomes a habit that can then be really hard to break. Then on the other side of that habit, you got folks rushing to get married and they can't even see that the person they trying to marry is logically a terrible fit for them. And or vice versa, all because they lack discipline in an area that is clearly of grave importance to them. Guys, sometimes it's easier to just not open a door than it is to try to close it. Not yet. Powerful phrase. Because see, you know how to operate on the outside of the door, but the reality is that a whole new set of things awaits you on the other side of that door. Things you couldn't possibly prepare yourself for prior to opening it. Things you can only learn to be great at by increasing your comfort level. And the only way to increase your comfort level is to practice, which is how that body count adds right on up real fast. Again, I'll say, sometimes the door is better left shut. Not yet. Now, in another season of your life, when you is good and grown, you have your own place, you are financially established, and you are prepared for potential little ones, well, baby, this conversation is going to look real different because your life circumstances at that time and your mindset would be different. So your boundaries could be different in that regard. In any season, though, the absolute most important question to ask yourself is why? Why do you want whatever or whomever you want? Why do you want to do whatever it is that you want to do? Now, if it's to quote unquote feel a connection with someone else because you're lonely a good bit of the time, baby, I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but it won't satisfy that. Another person will never satisfy loneliness because that is an emotion that has its origins in you. So only you can adjust that. And if you don't adjust that, you can have many experiences with others and still feel lonely. You can get yourself into a whole marriage, listen to me, and still be lonely because that's a you thing, not a person thing. See, because in running from the loneliness, what you're really trying to escape is being alone with yourself. Think about that for a moment. You'll never be able to escape yourself. Now, if your reason is to just go ahead and get it out of the way, so to speak, because you're grown and tired of waiting, honey, let me encourage you, don't lose heart, okay? Continue to value yourself and others as you have been. It's okay to be particular about who you decide to take that journey with because it's a process of building with someone. Don't listen. Don't believe the hype of the media or the church. At its highest and purest form, physical intimacy is not self-seeking or transactional. It's a reciprocal gift, a gift of creative energy. It's a journey, and you want to share that first experience and all the rest of your experiences with someone you absolutely love and trust, and those feelings are mutual. So please make sure you're on the same page about the future and your commitment level to one another. And if marriage is on the table, baby, maybe you can just wait till after because neither of you seem to be going anywhere anyway. So what's the rush when you have forever to spend together? Are you feeling pressured by someone else to go on and jump into some type of physical relationship? Because, honey, if so, child, just say no and get the heck up out of there ASAP. I can't think of a time where that's ever a good situation. And if you're being pressured by a quote unquote friend who means well, baby, listen in your own way. Tell them to use all that energy that they got trying to mind your business to mind theirs, because clearly they have plenty of time on their hands. Or is it a way that you choose to cope? Why or why not? Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to use physical intimacy as a way to cope, but I will say that if you do use that as a way to cope, then you need to be very mindful of how much you're using that method to cope, because there's another person with their own feelings on the other side of your decision. Don't selfishly drag them into something that you don't know how to deal with just because you're a mess of emotions. And if you're married and using physical intimacy as a way to cope, listen, whatever y'all want to do, but realize that's a lot of pressure to hang on someone else, to be at your beck and call, because again, that's still a person with feelings, not your own personal convenience store. That's a selfish and one-sided point of view and will likely leave your partner feeling some type of way. Or are you doing it out of boredom? If so, all I'm going to say is you reap what you sow. And with that same measure that you give that energy, it will come back to you. So don't be surprised if when you try to start settling down, you can't find nobody. Because you sowed those seeds with other people and your harvest is now upon you. So now you have to change some things and make some shifts, maybe even make some amends. But listen, whatever your reason is, you need to know why it's your reason, because then you can know how to best understand yourself and work with yourself and others in a more harmonious way. My own personal thoughts, now I'm probably biased, but abstinence is best until after a legally binding marriage, because it truly doesn't matter if you sample the goods beforehand or afterhand. Honey, you're likely still gonna have to alter some things that you know or think you know, or even the things that you might like, to accommodate and build something with another person. And things will happen over time in your lives that you couldn't have prepared for, which may alter sex drives and such. And at least if you both decide to build a life with each other without that physical aspect being a factor beforehand, you know you're committed to tackling whatever issues y'all will face together as a team. And that decision makes it easier to weather whatever storms may come together, the intimacy storm included, should it visit you. Now, if you gonna go on out there and open that door, y'all, at least be as safe as you can be, so that you don't let a few moments of hopeful pleasure alter the rest of your life. So let's wrap this thing up. Is sex within a marriage a guarantee that you're safe? No, it's not a guarantee, because people have varying coping methods and levels of discipline, but it does provide a barrier, which is why having a strong sense of personal responsibility is so important before participating in life-altering events. All in all, though, sensuality is part of our makeup as humans, and physical intimacy is a natural desire and can be a wonderful experience. And physical intimacy plus deep emotional intimacy from both parties, woo, listen, that's on a whole nother level of greatness. False realities painted in the media and other areas hinder the true beauty of physical intimacy. So don't believe the hype, y'all, because the reality is that physical intimacy is whatever two people decide to build together. It's respective to those two. It can't and shouldn't be compared to any other experience with anyone else. We must learn to bridle and control our sensual nature. But in order to do that, we must be okay with feeling all of that sensual energy and understanding it and knowing that it can be channeled in different ways. It doesn't have to be acted upon just because it's felt. It's part of you. You're always going to feel it. But discipline is key. I said discipline, not deprivation. Deprivation is typically used as a method of punishment. Discipline, though, in its true sense, is just establishing and adhering to a set of boundaries. And those boundaries may and probably should change in various seasons of your life, but only you can determine when to alter them by using as much wisdom as you can before making your decisions. Now listen to me real close. If you are in church leadership in any capacity and have signed your name to a code of ethics established by that church, Be a person of integrity and honor your word. Honor that signature and stick to whatever code you said you would, or just don't sign your name. Period. Your boundaries are established by that code of ethics because as a volunteer or employee, you represent that organization. So they reserve the right to dictate how they want you to represent them if they're extending their platform and space to you. That's only fair. Now, I know I've talked a lot about not opening the door, and that's because of the age of a good portion of my listening audience. But if you're out there listening and the door has already been opened in your life, whether you opened it or it was forced open by someone else, and you want to close it, it's never too late. Just figure out how and why that door was opened in the first place in your life, and then do the work to heal from your previous experiences if you need to, and discipline yourself accordingly. Figure out why you want to close it first, and make sure that why is a strong enough reason for your heart to follow. Lastly, remember guys, regardless of how you got the story, your story is your story. Own it and move on. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Let's Talk About It, the Gray Area. Next week, we'll be continuing this series by talking about forgiveness. And does a lack of it really hinder your prayers? Or nah, you don't want to miss it. So I'll see you next week. Same time, same place.
You can